years ago here in Florida, Payton Sapp, a 15-year-old quarterback, took a hit to the head when he was tackled, banging his head on the turf. He was in obvious distress. He didn't come out of the game. A few plays later, he was slung to the ground, again hit his head, and that started this ordeal of a concussion and a second impact syndrome that Payton and his family have endured over the last 2 years. I'm here with Courtney Sapp, Payton's mom, who's here to share the message of helping parents and coaches and athletes to understand the concerns of concussions, not just in football, but in sports. So Courtney, I thank you for being here today, and thank you for the message that you're sharing and the efforts to help others. Courtney, how knowledgeable were you of the signs and symptoms related to concussions before your son Payton had his injury 2 years ago?
I knew about that you would get a really bad headache. I mean, I've had a concussion before, but I know that the symptoms wouldn't show up really till later because it took a couple days for my symptoms to show up. Really, the only thing that I knew for sure was the headache. I didn't know about falling asleep because Payton fell asleep on the bench. I didn't know that when Payton was hit and he went to get up and he fell back down on his knees, I didn't know that was a sign of a concussion. I thought that was because in football they get hit, they are a little off balance, and then they get up and they go back to playing the game.
Because with a concussion, you don't see bruises, you don't see swelling, you can't just look at an x-ray to see how well they're healing. And seeing the changes as you have in your son with this concussion, how frustrating is it to manage this injury as a parent?
Extremely frustrating. It has been the hardest thing that I've had to go through so far. The treatment, I found out that doctors, the way Payton was treated, he was treated kind of, I guess you would say, backwards. It started with the pain medication for controlling the head pain. Well, later on we found out that that actually will prolong the symptoms. So it was a good 8 months before we finally found a neuropsychologist that knew what Payton needed, knew the neuro rehab that he needed to have. He had to have vision therapy, vestibular therapy. He took him off of all pain medications. And I spent a daily basis on the phone with doctors' offices, crying and begging for somebody to help him.
What do you know now about concussions that you wish you knew 2 years ago?
I know that a helmet can't prevent a concussion. The brain moves inside the skull whether they have a helmet on or not. I've also learned that a child can, or any player, I guess, could receive a hit in the chest, and because of the whiplash motion of the neck, they can receive a concussion, and nobody will know it because they didn't technically hit their head. So the second time they do receive a hit in the head, it can cause second impact syndrome, which then the brain can instantaneously swell. With Payton, I've learned that it causes balance issues, severe pain. It also causes emotional issues. The mood swings, they're up and down. It's hard.
Over the last 2 years, from what you've learned with your son Payton, what steps do you recommend parents and athletes take to decrease their risk of suffering a concussion?
For players especially, I would say communicate, watch out for each other. If one of your players are down, don't lift them up. I know they're taught to pick them back up and to keep going, but let them stay down. So then that way somebody will notice that they're not able to fully get up on their own, and they will pull them out of the game. For parents, education, if you know an athletic trainer is not going to be available during a game, ask the coaches, what is your plan? How are you going to keep these children safe or protected from detrimental injury?
What concussion-related changes do you want to see in youth sports, especially youth football?
Well, an athletic trainer would be perfect. at every school, a
Sure.
law that mandates it. I believe that that is going to be ultimately the one thing that can help prevent concussions or further injuries. I don't think it's fair to put it on a coach's shoulders because they don't have the education, the training, and it's out of their scope of work. So I think if there was somebody there that can be their voice, that can be that child's almost angel in my eyes, to pull them off that field, then I think that would help. I also think baseline testing at the beginning of the year is another crucial thing to have, and teaching the kids to speak up for one another.
If you had the opportunity to stand in front of a room with every youth football coach in the country, what would your message be and what would you say to them?
If you have 5 football coaches that are coaching a football team, I would suggest them to kind of look at all angles of the field. If they notice that a kid has been hit, realize that the symptoms are not going to show right away and that the child may need to be pulled out. They don't want it on their shoulders. They don't want to see a child not be able to go to school for a year. They don't want to see a child pass away from second impact syndrome. It's listen to your kids. If they say, "Coach, I can't play," then tell them to go sit down. Listen to the other teammates who may go up to the coach and say, "Hey, this one's not doing well. I think he needs to come out of the game." Instead of saying it'll be okay, pull him out of the game.
We talked today before the interview about the many struggles your son Payton has dealt with over the last 2 years after suffering from second impact syndrome, having multiple concussions in the same game. Can you share with the parents the wide range of symptoms your son Payton has dealt with because of those concussions?
Payton's symptoms, he had the headaches. He also had dizziness. He had vestibular problems, so he would run into a wall. He also, his legs were very heavy. He would drag his left foot. I'm not sure if that's common with a concussion or not. Blurry vision, and then the vision went from blurry to a veil going over his eyes, and he couldn't see off and on. Nausea. He also, emotional problems, depression. There's a long list of symptoms, and Payton seemed to have had every single one of them.
And those symptoms have continued 2 years later?
Yes, they've gotten better, but they do continue.
Courtney, your message is not lost. Parents are listening to you, athletic trainers are listening, obviously athletes are listening, and we all thank you for your efforts in what you're doing, which is going to keep our young athletes safe. We wish Payton a full recovery. Courtney Sapp, thank you.
Thank you.